Thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm Gary Arlen. I'm president of Arlen Communications, a research company in the Washington, D.C. area. That's about the only bio you'll get from me or from anyone else this afternoon in the interest of time. Our program book has everybody's bio information and all the basics you need to know, so I thought we'd just take advantage of our time here today to plunge directly into our message, which is how interactive opportunities and interactive technologies are energizing this industry. Many of the things we heard from Anthony in the opening remarks this afternoon drive a lot of the ideas we're moving toward here. And we're going to concentrate on a few of the specialties that our panelists have developed and what their companies offer to the ecosystem of interactive media. We're just going to plunge right into this right now, and to some degree we're going to bounce around the table a little bit. We'll have everyone make a brief opening remark with some illustrations. I think we start to pass this down to Dan. I'll have Dan go first. Dan Eakins is the CEO of Zeitera. And Dan, why don't you start by telling us what you're up to and a little bit about how you're engaging interactivity.
Thanks, Gary. I'm Dan Eakins, CEO of Zeitera. Zeitera is a small technology company that builds fingerprinting technology. We do essentially ACR, enable what's considered ACR or automatic content recognition. We have some slides, if we could pull up the Zeitera slides, and I can walk through those. So as it's coming up, so we're local, we're a Silicon Valley company. We've been around for about 5 years. The technology itself is completely developed in-house. We do both audio and video fingerprinting. We deploy it. Are there slides up or no? I'll see them. Oh, okay. So you can see the product offering now. So we have a client. The client essentially can work on a mobile device, iOS, Android, tablet device. We have a way of creating signatures. We call it the ingest platform, and then we have a search platform that runs, and that's a managed search platform. And our target customers, since we're a B2B company, is really the broadcasters, broadcaster companies who work with them, so distributors, MSOs, or any other company that wants to be in this place for interactivity. Next slide. Oh, it's me. Okay, so the ITV ecosystem, as we think about it, this is actually a slide that comes from our friends at NBC. They're sketched it out. Chip Canner sketched it out for me one day. And essentially, the network programmer has a content management system, something like an Ensequence or a Participate or some other system. They have ads, they have promos, they have contents. We fingerprint it. That's what you see in green there. And then we have a search engine, and we deploy a client that's on a device, and then people write applications on top of it. And then when content goes and it's played out over a broadcast network, we can recognize the content as a user is consuming it, so over any type of traditional channel. And we allow them, basically the broadcasters, to do whatever they want with that content. And then, of course, on the other side, you see all the other type of services, which will become part of like driving this ecosystem. And you know, what do we focus on at Zeitera? It's really, we make algorithms that are, I think, better than you know, the majority of the people out there who are focused on a broad type of content, be it music or anti-piracy or whatever, and we make the search extremely scalable and extremely cost-effective. And you know, so that's essentially our secret sauce. And this gives you an idea from a high-level client architecture. People write applications. We have published APIs. We have the ability to have the library be portable to all these different types of devices. We have the ability to push signatures to the device so we can do local search. And you know, it's a very, very flexible and rich offering that we provide. So that's Zeitera. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, let's pass the control down to this end of the table. We're going to go next to Graham Oakes, who is the CEO of Media Science International and Ezee Studios, and also Graham is the chairman of the Digital Watermarking Alliance, a relatively small but important association that affects a lot of what we're talking about today. Graham?
Good afternoon. The main focus of Media Science business is as a watermarking technology company and the related services. The main focus of our business has been traditionally in the music business, where we have, in conjunction with the RIAA, actually established a standard for watermarking. It took 3 years, which I believe is actually really quite short, to actually get an industry to actually agree on a standard. I'm hoping that in the future we can get a standard for the video industry, and I believe that could probably take, at least another 5 years, but any suggestions on how to help that would be gratefully received. The point of the watermarking in the music industry is that not only are we using the technology to protect the pre-release from an anti-piracy point of view, but we're also watermarking all the commercially available music. That's also the commercially available videos which go along with the music. In this respect, the idea is that we have a unique identifier that actually travels with each part of the content. It doesn't make any difference whether it's transcoded, whether it's broadcast, or what platform that it's consumed on. The watermark actually stays with it. Unlike a fingerprint, where the basic difference is that a fingerprint for a piece of content is always the same, with a watermark, it's not necessarily the same. The same piece of content can have multiple different watermarks in. This allows for a much more granular approach to the automated content recognition and adding other services building upon that. The watermark itself is an enabling technology to enable these forward-thinking operations. To give you an idea of where we are, at the beginning of this month, we just passed tracking 50 million unique watermarks.
Sounds like a lot of activity so far and a lot more to come.
We are hoping so, yes.
Long wait, too. Let's move down the table then to Andy Nobbs, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of Civolution. I know you've got a booth out there. We'll have a chance to see a close-up of what you do, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what Civolution has been accomplishing so far, and
Okay,
what your
Gary.
vision is.
Yeah, Gary, thank you very much. There is a slide deck to go with this. So, yeah, there you go. I am Andy Nobbs. I want to be Anthony Zucker today, but I'm not. I'm Andy Nobbs. I'm what's called Chief Commercial Officer of Civolution, which actually means I have to try and help the company make a bit of money. So maybe you do or you do not know about Civolution. We kind of have a three-pronged mantra, which is we identify, manage, and monetize on behalf of the content industry. So, in essence, Dan's talked about fingerprinting, Graham's talked about watermarking. We're actually a company that has created both of those technologies. We've deployed them in multiple kind of arenas, and we'll talk a bit about those in a moment. But our view is that by helping the content community, which is our primary constituency, by helping the content community identify its content, we can thereby help them manage that content. And ultimately, of course, we can help them monetize it. We can help them make some money. I did think it might be useful, I don't know, Gary, if you want to do this, but just to kind of talk a bit about the technical differences between fingerprinting and watermarking. I mean, we have three buckets or three silos to our business, what we call media protection. So if we look at the kind of cradle-to-grave concept of a piece of media, so it could be CSI, for example, or maybe CSI the movie. When that content is being first produced, we provide watermarking, video watermarking technologies in the post-production phase, so that if any content leaks, we can tell people where that leak occurred. The movie is then, of course, released to theatre. We're lucky in that we have a very strong position in the theatrical community, and then, of course, it might go to pay TV or IFE, and we use watermarking there. So the way we call it there on that slide is forensic marking. Then, of course, the CSI would go to TV, which we call kind of broadcast monitoring, so the linear TV environment. And then it kind of gets a bit blurry. So when we move into the third piece, the second being monitoring, to something called media interaction, the stuff we're talking about today, I think it does get an awful lot muddier, and I guess maybe that's why we're here, to kind of understand which, not necessarily which is best, because I think our view is that actually they are not necessarily kind of, one is not necessarily better than the other. I mean, I think our view is that we would say watermarking, for some reasons I'm sure we'll discuss, is probably, for us, the most appropriate mechanism. I think we have a reasonable track record of success in the media marketplace. We track 1,600 TV channels. We've been watermarking stuff for quite some time, for 12 years. We have 600 million watermarks floating around in lots of households, whether they be US, whether they be European broadcasters. And as it says there, more than 40,000 cinemas around the world. So we think we can kind of lay claim to some understanding of the marketplace. And again, fingerprinting, you know, we've developed, you know, a TV or broadcast TV monitoring operation in conjunction with our watermarking piece that actually enables us to deploy both technologies for slightly different ends. So at the end of the day, I think we're, you know, we are trusted by a number of reasonably influential people, largely the content community. So I think what we're here to, or what I'm here today, is just to maybe explain some of the differences between the two technologies, and then just...
Can you give us any scale of how big an issue this is, how big a problem, or how big a solution you have offered? I put that in a way of quantifying it. Is it a $500 billion threat to the industry, content industry? You know, what kind of scale are we looking at here? Or is that an unfair way to monitor it?
You mean in terms of content protection?
Yes,
Or?
yeah, the value.
I think, you know, if the MPAA, you know, quite freely publicizes data on what it believes to be, you know, the threat in terms of content theft to the creative industries. I mean, that's one bit of our business. I don't think we would pretend to know, frankly, what that number is. I mean, we work with, you know, for example, the studio. So at the end of the day, we are, you know, Graham used the phrase enabling technologies. What we're about is providing enabling technologies to them to help stop the bleeding or the leakage in that space. I mean, I think what we're talking about today is kind of actually the other end of it, which is trying to make money from stuff. So not losing money, but actually making money.
Excellent.
And I think Anthony, you know, Zuka talked kind of eloquently and passionately about, you know, the way that the industry can evolve to address those needs. So, you know, there are multi-facets to our business, both in terms of protection. So I'm not going to give you a number. That's a long-winded way, so I'm not going to give you a number.
It's always fun, and the reporters in the room like quantitative numbers, but at least we have an idea that this remains a big issue and also a big opportunity to monetize the content that's being managed. We'll move on then to Aslam Khader, who is the Chief Technology and Chief Product Officer of Ensequence, a company that's been at this for a while. Aslam, why don't you tell us what you're up to and how you see the situation?
Thanks, Gary, and thanks for coming here, folks. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about Ensequence. We've been around for about just over 10 years. Initially started with a lot of work in the UK. Since the last 7 years, been working very actively here in the US across all of the traditional TV distributors and TV content producers. So, you know, it's interesting what Anthony spoke about this afternoon is precisely how things have been evolving in the UK 5-6 years ago when we were working with the BBC, Channel 5, ITV, and some of these other content producers and broadcasters, and how they were looking to actually have the whole interactive experience be embraced by the creators themselves, so that the whole focus is on the show itself, on enhancing the experience and extending it 24/7, really. And as a company, our focus has always been in terms of providing the necessary capabilities to allow these producers to essentially develop these multi-platform franchises that they can do so in a way that allows this business to flourish. So one of the biggest issues that has been that we've seen is that you know, in terms of the traditional way of distribution and the platforms, just the process of creating and deploying interactive television has just been, or interactivity has just been extremely inefficient and very expensive without a monetization model. Because the monetization models, as we all know, happen when you have scale. You know, everybody talks about scale. Scale is really important, but scale is also very, very difficult. So we've been focused in that area exclusively, and what we've done is really provided a platform to content creators, programmers, and operators to essentially create and deploy in a very scalable way interactive programming and advertising content across both traditional distribution and the emerging distribution via a lifecycle and workflow management system that essentially is all about scale. Because again, without scale, there is no monetization. Without monetization, this is just another you know, marketing effort that doesn't last very long because there's no money behind it. So to kind of put money behind it, we've created this platform which is essentially services the three main kind of ecosystem players: the service providers who essentially deliver content to you, the programmers who essentially create or get the content created, and then we have a capability that allows all of that to be done on a national or on a local basis. And our solution essentially then enables whether you are a content creator or a distributor to essentially add enhancements and value to the content to monetize it in a scalable way. So efficiency, scalability is the norm. And as these new platforms are emerging that are becoming more and more conducive to the consumption of premium content, and as technologies such as we see sitting around the table here emerge to allow that content to be identified, we've essentially over the last year or so embraced these emerging areas with our content customers who are essentially look at this as a way for them to clearly enhance the value of their content in an extremely efficient way, and that efficiency is kind of what we've been in the process of providing. So if you've followed us, we've done integration efforts with the ACR companies, be it Zeitera with fingerprinting, Civolution with watermarking. We see this as being really a way in which from taking these various technologies and the platform that we provide to essentially provide a system, a solution to the content industry to allow them to really efficiently monetize and create monetization structures for their content.
Well, thank you, Aslam. Let's wrap up our introductory remarks by hearing from David Jones, who is the Executive Vice President for Marketing at Shazam, a company that's really been very active in integrating music, video, and interactivity. David, why don't you give us a little update of where and how you got to this point?
Great, thanks very much. I have a couple of slides, if you can pull those up, please. So most of you know Shazam as the app that identifies what that song is. We've done that over 2.5 billion times around the world for 165 million users, all through their mobile phones. It's been a wonderful journey, fourth most downloaded app of all time on iTunes, growing rapidly thanks to that magical moment of identifying something and quickly getting you to the answer and going on to buy it very effortlessly. Shockingly, 8% of the people go on to buy the music, which leads to over $100 million of music sales for iTunes and Amazon and other major music storefronts around the world. From that foundation, with 55 million people in the US, 165 million people around the world with Shazam on their phone, we're launching and getting into Shazam for TV. And essentially, we're bringing that scale, not just technology scale, but scale with consumers who can interact with your content from an existing app they already have on their phone to the second screen. So everyone knows 86% of the people watch television and use their mobile device at the same time. It's a Nielsen Yahoo statistic, and it's absolutely true. Well, the second screen is a great way to augment the experience around TV, to deliver some of that bonus content, more information about the show, essentially helping the networks and the show creators bridge interest from episode to episode. Some of those people will talk about it, and from there, more people continue to watch the series, and the ratings stay high, and people make money. So when you Shazam a television show, a select show where the show creators are working with us, there's usually a little call to action on screen to remind you to do that. You get this rich tag result with this rich result in the app that lets you watch exclusive video, participate in a sweepstakes, pretty much anything that the show creators want to do to drive engagement around the show. And then from there, most of the networks have, especially NBC, with a rich set of mobile sites and a lot of content on their mobile sites, but no one's going to those sites. And so a little 5-second reminder on screen will drive countless number of people over to the mobile site to consume that content. So we're doing this at scale with consumers. So we've had almost 2 years of experience, numerous programs, a lot of different networks, a lot of different shows. This is just a few of the examples. Really wanted to share some of the results just to get real about what's happening. And that is that these are 3 different shows with roughly a rating of 1 throughout the various episodes of a season. The top graph is a TV show with a Shazam call to action in it for 5 seconds, either on screen during a segment or during a promo break, a 15-second promo reminding you can Shazam. That's driving over 500% more people to the mobile site than two other, similarly sized shows that are either just doing Twitter hashtags and Facebook on-screen kind of prompts or nothing at all. So this definitely drives people. It's so easy. It drives people to engage more in the existing content that the networks and the show creators already have. Another great example here, this is from a season a season that just ended recently. Everyone thinks there's a tremendous amount of tweeting going on out there for shows, and that's right. It's a high volume of tweets per show per day. We went back and pulled some data on tweets on the day of the air of each of these episodes, Facebook likes on the day of the air from these episodes, and of course Shazams, the actual tags or people who Shazam the show, and more people Shazammed each episode of this particular TV series than tweets on Twitter and likes on Facebook combined. So a very brief prompt, the ease of the experience, and people can get immersed in a wonderful network crafted or show crafted experience. We're network friendly. We want to make it easy for the shows to drive that type of engagement. And because of that, because we're working with the shows with exclusive content and engaging experiences, 92% of the people who've Shazammed a television show would do it again. And so it's very important as we blaze this trail and make this market to make sure that it's a good, rich, satisfying, positive experience. And this demonstrates why working with shows and not just blanketing, making every show on the planet able to be checked in and maybe tweet and do a post, we're actually crafting satisfying experiences so people continue to repeat. We're doing the same thing for advertisers. I won't go through that here, but from Chevrolet Volt to Bud Light to Progressive, great list of live programs or ads online right now that on TV that you can Shazam with some pretty interesting results. The advertisers love this because it takes $40 million TV ad campaigns and for the first time ever makes them essentially clickable, and people can engage, shop from their couch, or go deeper in whatever way the advertiser wants. So we're doing it at scale with 55 million people in the US with Shazam on their phones able to engage.
Thank you, David. And, let's get serious. This is an audience here who knows the TV business. This is a reality show we got up here on stage. These are people talking about how they're living their life and hoping to make their livings. So typically we created a little script of what we wanted to ask them about. And I've given you all the questions in advance. But as I listened to your presentations, I saw one continuity that I've seen before, and that is you all mention the same names of the same clients you're all selling to. Ultimately, you're all vendors selling to a market that's a fairly limited market of potential customers. So who are the best customers? I know I could ask you who are the worst customers, and you'd ignore me. But of the ones you list here, a lot of you list CNN, NBC, Comcast, Disney, Discovery. David, you mentioned producers, you said the shows, but actually mean the production companies, which includes some of the aforementioned. So who are the best ones who get it, who understand why interactivity is part of their future?
In terms of the music business, we're down to now 3 majors, and if Sony buys Warner's, we'll be down to 2. So that leaves 2 checkbooks.
Do they get it?
It doesn't matter, they're the only 2 checkbooks.
But what if they don't want to play with you? They don't play at all, in other words.
Then they don't play at all. I mean, as far as the music business is concerned, anti-piracy has been a major factor. As far as the TV film world is concerned, it's not really that big a problem because, we're still on dial-up modem, so, we haven't got a lot of bandwidth for downloading big files. But I think we're actually onto broadband now.
There's a lot of other vendors in this room who want that to happen soon, that we have enough bandwidth to do that.
And it will come. And then and all of the ideas that come along with what can be done, what services can be offered, are all going to have to change. That you can't have. We're trying to monetize, and it's basically okay. So we're gonna have some augmented reality. We're going to have added value that we're giving to people, but whose content is it, and who's actually getting that added value? Where is it coming from? From music, it's available everywhere. For TV, well, we're talking about heading in that direction. And the question then going to come is, how are we actually going to deal with that in terms of the market?
Okay, so you're still waiting for Sony and Warner to make sure that this business happens. And they're already involved with it, committed to it.
We actually work for all of the majors. Even when there were more of them, we actually worked for all of them. So.
Dan, you mentioned some of these same companies, the video companies in particular. Who really gets it, and who's going to make this market of interactivity happen?
Well, so rather than naming, exactly how they all fit in, and I could do that for you.
We're just among us.
But I could, basically the major broadcasters are probably the most forward-thinking about this, and how we tend to classify after going around and talking to 50 of them and having deals with like 10 of them. The ones who really get it are the people who are doing ad-supported content and who have major investments in trying to keep that business moving forward. You don't have as much interest when you go to a Showtime or an HBO in investing in the content and doing the creativity. I think a lot of the stuff today is really not so much about driving ad experiences today, but how to make the content itself really interesting so that the advertising dollars will flow with it. And that's kind of where we've seen the major kind of breakage occurs. Now, as you look at each of those ad-supported broadcasters, and cable networks, it really, NBC is out there doing a lot of stuff. Turner's doing a lot of stuff. ABC's doing some stuff. CBS seems to be kind of waking up now more, but I would kind of, probably have similar, experiences from other people on the panel.
And among the cable networks, you say Turner, obviously, and some of the Time Warner, the Time Warner networks in
So
general.
the cable networks themselves seem to have some interest, but it tends to be more the big broadcaster groups. That's what we see,
ESPN has been very active in some things. Are you not working with them?
I think ESPN is interested, but they're not so interested because they have so much revenue on the cable side. The ad-supported stuff is not as big for them today.
Of course, they're related to ABC, so they have some.
So when you go to
crossover.
ABC has huge interest in this, and ESPN, $6 billion a year, it comes as just like every year.
Aslam, you recommend many of these companies also. Which ones do you see have the vision for interactivity?
It's interesting because Gary, what we see is many of the players today, so if you look at all of these players, the main thing that's important to them is distribution and eyeballs. And if you look at the eyeball game today is still very much focused on traditional distribution. And the traditional distributors are hamstrung because the platforms are really hard to work with, so it's very expensive. So if you look at the monetization models, today it seems like the majority of the networks are still figuring out how they can make money from enhanced television, okay? So core television is still the bread and butter. The 30-second spot still rules. Enhancements to that 30-second spot and how they can make more money out of in-program sponsorship in a scalable way is very much a work in progress. So from a digital side, there's, as we know, a tremendous amount of teeth gnashing going on to figure out how much to put on the digital front. How do you monetize that? What ad loads do you want to put? What CPMs do you want to charge? Whether that's an extension to the 30-second spot that you've sold in linear, or whether that's a brand new ad inventory and ad sell, all of these things are still being worked out.
So you're not going to name any names of the list you showed us of people who really are driving interactive?
So it's interesting. There are a few people like NBC who are thinking ahead. Turner is thinking ahead. Does anybody have well laid out plans on how they're going to monetize this in a scalable way? We are not privy to that. So even though we are in the game, we haven't seen that. What I will tell you is that different networks approach it differently. So as an example, you mentioned HBO. Well, HBO has actually been a very forward-looking customer from our perspective because they've been putting in place interactive and enhanced experiences to drive subscription. So on the one hand, they don't care about ads, but they do care about subscription. So they've been using the technology to drive subscription.
I want to make sure I understand, that the audience understands that as well. So while, Dan, you say HBO is not so aggressive for the purposes you're working with them for, Aslam finds that they are aggressive for the kind of things that Ensequence offers to the company.
Well, using EBIF.
Yep.
Which you could
To the
consider.
microphone.
Yeah, EBIF, which you could consider an ACR technology, but it's not one of these new over-the-top models like
Right.
watermarking or fingerprinting.
But they have plans, they definitely have plans how they are using
Yes,
the
yes.
second screen to drive more of the subscription revenue, because the large part of their, obviously, existence is subscription
Sure.
revenue. Whereas someone like an ESPN looks at it a little differently and says, I don't want to jeopardize my $4.85 or $5, whatever a month per subscriber that I get from my traditional distribution. I'm going to work with my traditional distributors to enhance the value of the product that I provide them, whether that's on one screen or two screens. So I'll work on TV everywhere, projects, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of that ecosystem inertia, so to speak, and that's not a bad term, but there's a lot of ecosystem inertia that's kind of holding this ecosystem together in a pretty tight ball.
Andy, from your perspective, how do you see the various networks and customers driving this? Are there some that are really more aggressive for your purposes?
I think I think Hassan's absolutely right. And I kind of track back and give it, for me, some historical perspective. So I think the music industry, Graham's talked about that, and the kind of Napster, iTunes thing, kind of hugely disruptive. And the thing we see to the music industry we see today is not the thing we saw then. The newspaper industry, I think, is, and I kind of have a great fondness for that, is similarly struggling. So, and I think that kind of, in the face of profound change, and to use that horrible other P word, a paradigm shift, I think Hassan's right. What we're seeing is people laying multiple bets, kind of trying a bit of this, trying a bit of that, seeing so the incumbents kind of doing what they can, and that, that's the US networks. Certainly, if I look at where I live, which is London, one sees BBC trying to do its thing, and there's a kind of interesting angle there, because actually, and I don't know if you know something called iPlayer here, which was devised by a chap called Anthony Rose, has actually just started a new startup in the UK called Zbox. And it's kind of its sisters are things like TV Genius. So there's quite a thriving second screen industry now in the UK. And Zbox is really kind of taking forward to some of the things that Dave was talking about, their thing called Z tags, taking a Twitter feed in. So it's kind of early stages. But certainly we see that something kind of forming in the mist. So I think we're seeing, the networks laying multiple bets. I think we're seeing these new disruptive things coming through. And frankly, for us, there are opportunities and deals we have executed that actually we would never have thought would have happened. So, you've got players who don't fall into the traditional buckets of kind of being a broadcast owner or a content owner, or indeed the advertiser. So you've now got people who are kind of sort of intermediaries in public spaces, for example, which is not a world that was kind of known to us. So I think it is, maybe it's me being slightly dim, but I find it, extremely complex, very foggy, and I therefore understand why the networks and the studios, kind of have to try and get their heads around it. The danger, I think, is, that they don't move quick enough, and actually we do see a repeat in the video industry that we saw, frankly, in the music industry.
Well, you raise an interesting point, especially since the legacy media industries in Hollywood and New York, print and advertising and television, and yet within 30 miles of where we're sitting right now is a whole new bunch of companies that, as you say, have the opportunity to disrupt what they did. Now, David, since you're one of the companies that's headquartered within 30 miles of where we're sitting right now, and you also listed a number of positive companies you're working with, which do you see as the ones that really are going to drive this new evolution?
Anthony had it right earlier.
Closer to the mic, please.
In the keynote, that the networks and especially the producers, the show creators, not that much, the show creators are extending their programming beyond the TV to these second screen experiences. And everyone's trying to figure out how to monetize directly the second screen experience through sponsorships of maybe the apps or the shows in those apps. But one thing that's clear to the networks and to the producers and the show creators is that they can use the second screen interactivity and engagement to, again, bridge from episode to episode. And, everyone knows what works in television. Great content drives ratings, drives advertising and sponsorship revenues. And so the second screen clearly can help drive engagement, excitement, interest in the shows to extend through the series and to support that business. And so the networks get that, the show creators and producers get that, and that's why we're seeing so much interest in what we're doing, because it works.
Are you going to join the several on the panel have already said NBC is among the leaders in getting this.
I can agree that NBC's definitely gets it. They're moving fast and aggressively into trying different things with lots of different companies and in different shows and channels. But they are innovative and experimenting quite a bit and out in the forefront.
But the
And
key
then-
word is experimentation, right?
Yeah.
Any others you want to mention from your experience? David?
From my experience?
No, I was like, David,
David.
let David finish that.
From my
Anybody else beside NBC?
Oh,
Comcast NBC, as we should say.
you know, we're working with everyone, so folks are coming along at different paces, so why don't I leave it there?
All right, let's leave it at that. Let's move to one of the other things. In the literature about this session, Fred emphasized that this is going to include automatic content recognition, relatively new term of art to a lot of people. Why don't we try to go through that a little bit for a moment and see, what's working there? Who's doing it right? Again, I always have that question of what lessons can we learn from the people who've been out there and done something right. But let's start by getting a little feel for what ACR is all about. Aslam, why don't we? Do you mind talking a little bit about ACR?
Sure. So, the way we've been looking at ACR is it's a set of technologies that enable a device that is essentially being used to consume media, rich media, to recognize what that rich media is, and that comes into essentially the technologies at heart are watermarking and fingerprinting, one invasive but potentially more flexible, the other one non-invasive. But potentially more powerful. Nonetheless, these are the technologies that are being used to essentially identify what content is being consumed.
I would add, Shazam's been at this for 11 years now. It started in 2000. Some of the seminal IP and work around audio content recognition was done by, the co-founders of Shazam back in the day. And, it couldn't be done in the 1990s. And just to tell a quick story, when the business side of our co-founders were looking for the technologists, the chief scientists to crack this code, they talked to over 40 PhDs in signal processing around the country, and 40 people said no. And then they got to Avery Wang, postdoc student at Stanford University, who said, I don't think it can be done, but I'll give it a shot. And 6 months later, he had cracked the code. And then from that point forward, we've been making it better and better. Noisy environments, pitch and speed corrected environments, just being able to detect very quiet audio. Believe it or not, some of the technologies that are out there 15 feet away from the TV with a normal TV volume on, it actually isn't loud enough for the ACR technology to work. For Shazam it is. So it's been a long, good journey for us, and there is a lot of science behind it, and it is a little bit, it's hard. It's not easy to deal with those real-world situations where kids are talking or playing in the living room while you're watching TV, or you're in a noisy car Shazamming the radio.
Andy, you brought up the point in the second part of the assets and services that Civolution provides is this ability to do some recognition and know what's out there. How do you see ACR fitting into the ecoscape going forward?
Ecoscape, that's a word that's new to me, so I'll
Well, ecosystem, as
I'll
someone
go
else
with
called
that,
it.
don't worry. I mean, as I said, we've devised both watermarking and fingerprinting technologies, so I think I hope we understand reasonably well the kind of, the strengths and weaknesses, some of the stuff that Aslan talked about. I mean, our view is ultimately, that if you go to your 30,000, helicopter 30,000 feet and say there's more, it is easier and cheaper to produce content. It is easier and cheaper to present or publish or distribute content. So, in our mind, that means it's actually potentially a recipe for chaos because you've got more stuff flowing about in more places. So therefore, and I think this is kind of a common thread for everyone on this panel, the ability to have, to provide order to that chaos is what we think, those technologies are about, those ACR technologies, as evidenced by watermarking and fingerprinting. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we have seen an evolution in our business that's accelerating from a kind of classic B2B point, and that's still the world we inhabit, by the way. But I think we are now seeing a new ecoscape, a new ecosystem, whereby you can glue together very kind of conveniently, a number of key players, the players being, as we've talked about, the ad-supported model, so the advertising community, the content community, the distribution community, and at the end of the day, the thing that kind of makes most sense, which is actually the user, the consumer, the viewer. So we're driving a lot of our attention. I mean, David talked about the Shazam development, which has, been a kind of fantastic feat, towards kind of helping the content community, helping the media community, using ACR technologies to actually kind of very kind of purposefully, accurately, and accurately to engage with, the user. So for us, these are just but means to an end, and means to an end actually on behalf of our clients.
Dan, at your point in the value chain that we're describing, where does ACR, automatic content recognition, fit into your vision of what is needed to make this work?
Yes. So ACR, it's kind of a new term for the industry. I mean, all of us have been in this industry long enough to know that.
Well, we're not going to put a poll number up there, but how many have known the term automatic content recognition? Just raw poll before you came into this room. So maybe half of you were admitting to knowing the term. And that's people in the industry, around the industry. So your point is well taken.
So it's coming along. The first guys I actively heard saying it were actually the engineering and research guys at NBC, and they kind of started
Those
calling
NBC guys are real hip, aren't they?
Well, no, they just wanted a term that I think was more marketable than fingerprinting, which was anti-piracy,
Yep.
or watermarking, which was, forensics. And so there was a lot of negative connotations with the business model involved in ACR that as an industry that needed some type of rebranding. So ACR is a kind of a commercial way to do interactivity, whether or not it's a fingerprint or a watermark, or you could come up with some other way of doing automatic content recognition. Certainly you can do it through like this natural language processing type of stuff, other things, speech to text. There are lots of methods, I think, that would fit into that, but the idea is that it's a way to, differentiate for us the difference between, policing people and trying to figure out when they're using something illegally versus, trying to encourage people to interact with content in kind of a stale broadcast world. That's what I think of. And I think it's a good effort, and it's obviously caught on enough that people are,
Well, I'm going to ask David just a second, but I was going to ask Graham, since one of your businesses is the chairman of a group called Digital Watermarking. What do you do about ACR?
I was actually just wondering, what's wrong with the word watermark? I mean, fingerprint I get, but watermark is...
So it's not that there's nothing wrong with the term. I think it just comes with so much baggage in the industry. So if you're an executive at one of these major networks and they say, we want to watermark everything, and then people start thinking about that way, it has a certain amount of baggage from the industry. And it's certainly usually a cost center. And it's involved in cost centers and inside the company. It's not, so it's kind of has a negative business impact when you have the discussions. Now, if you talk about ACR, it's actually the same type of thing, right? But all of a sudden
It seems to be something that enables new services.
It's new services, new money. That's like, we could make so much money with ACR. Well, it's really the same thing. So.
David, we interrupted you. Go ahead, David.
Oh, I was just going to add that,
To the microphone.
we haven't talked about the power of this, but the fact is the word automatic, it instantly it leapfrog any friction in the process. You don't have to type in a URL. You don't have to go to a website and say, I'm watching this or doing that. It's instant and automatic engagement or starting a process. And so whether it's for policing anti-piracy or whether it's for new services or driving engagement with shows, ads, or content, it's very powerful. And so we're all approaching it from different perspectives, but it is amazing what happens when you get rid of the friction.
And Graham, did you want the last word on that?
Yeah, it's on a separate sort of in terms of not music, not TV, but in terms of a still image, we're actually working with a government department for watermarking their logos, with the idea being that you can point your smartphone at the logo and that will automatically link you to the appropriate mobile website. The idea is that, if we talk about a refrigerator, once it's been sold, then all the information that's related to that's all disappeared because it's taken away. But with the watermark that will actually stay in the actual logo, then all this information's easily and instantly retrievable.
So it serves a long-term purpose as well for the value of it. In the limited time we have left, I want to do a couple other topics that were in the script. One is, of course, we talk about companion devices. Several of you have mentioned, I think David mentioned that the statistics that 86% of viewers have some device, either a smartphone or a tablet with them while they're watching linear television. But going toward this whole issue of companion devices, there's so many variations of the multi-screen multi-platform conversation. What do you expect to be any game changer that really drives this forward? Is it going to be content? Is it going to be a combination of devices? What makes multi-screen really successful beyond the fad we're in right now, which, by the way, has been a fad that's been around since 1994. If any of you know the story, if I can interrupt just for a second, on the story of the first example of multi-screen viewing. It was a Showtime boxing match, and they set up when the web was young in 1995, 96, something like that, the opportunity that the viewers could score the match, the boxing match, and they expected that everyone would score it at the end of the round during the minute between rounds. They'd go out and get on their computer and vote. Well, it was turning out they were scoring it by the punch, which was the first revelation that the TV set and the computer, the desktop computer at that time, were in the same room. Very interesting how we've moved along in 15 years since then to a different ecoscape, a different landscape, a different ecosystem. But what is going to be the device and what is going to be the relationship going forward? And David, why don't you start on that one?
Sure, I think the devices are likely to be mobile devices, blend of tablets and smartphones, even laptops on your couch or wherever you might have them. It's not necessarily device dependent. The breakout opportunity is going to be when someone takes something like Lost, if you all remember Lost, many years ago now, and actually brings that type of backstory and beyond the broadcast, great storytelling about what's going on, trying to figure stuff out, the layers underneath what was actually broadcast, brings that with social media and with mobile second screen experiences, augmenting the action. I'm looking forward to someone bringing that to the table and nailing it. And I think it's just around the corner. And I think it's just a matter of time until this becomes so mainstream that you'll continue to use your mobile device, but in all these new ways. I don't think interactive TV is the long-term answer, certainly not the short-term answer. Too much fragmentation, too many different set-top boxes, cable companies, satellite companies, connected TV companies, TV manufacturers, so many different ways people are trying to come at it with disruptive experiences, with guides on the screen that impact your spouse or kids that are watching with you. I think the augmentation, the enhanced experience through a second screen, whatever that may be over time, is everyone's onto something for a reason.
Aslam, you work throughout the value chain here. Where do you see the driver for this next age of interactive content and interactive companion device usage?
That's a very interesting question, Gary, because for us it's our bread and butter, and our future is dependent on this not being a fad. It's been a fad for too long.
Well, it hasn't really been a fad. It's been a promised fad.
It's been a promised fad for too long. So if you just apply simple economics to this industry, which I hope people start doing soon, it's a question of supply and demand, and it's a question of who kind of moves the ball first. So we've always believed that the content industry has to move the ball by virtue of giving people a reason to really do stuff. At the end of the day, as an advertiser, as a network, as a content producer, the most important thing for me is that a viewer, a consumer, picks up their remote control or their companion device and actually does something with it that's linked to my content. And for that to happen, you actually do need the content creators, because we can't sit here, we believe, having interacted with a lot of these content creators, that the stuff that's going on now is the tip of the iceberg in terms of creativity, right? So we got to hand the tools to the content creators so that they can essentially chart the future for how people consume content, what content gets produced and how people consume that content. And there has to be a business model wrapped around that, because without a business model, it's an experiment.
Well, let me ask a couple other panelists that. Dan, have you seen the business model yet that makes sense for these multi-platform, cross-platform delivery?
So the business model, to me, that's a separate question, the business model.
Well, answer the first one and then come over to this one too. The first question about what's the separate device, the multiple device
Right. There's
scenario?
there's a use model or a use case problem that we typically see, where people say, look, I have this show and I think about it in a linear form. Now I want to get someone else to log in and use it. It's hard, and it's hard to come up. I think some content lends itself more to it, like a game show. I like certain things, but I don't think that matters a lot, because the people produce these shows. And I was actually really interested in the keynote, because there were so many good ideas, I think, about how to enable it, that once this starts happening and you use broadcast and linear TV as kind of a launch pad to a lot of more interesting experiences, then I think it'll catch on. I don't know what it is, and part of the reason we took the business model we did is that we said we can't figure it out. We are good technologists, and we can build a really great platform, great technology, and we can make it available to people. But we want to encourage the tools and the rapid experimentation with as many different partners as possible, so that they can go figure out what the best model is. And our long-term goal is to have enough people using it that it's a scalable platform and can be monetized, and they want to pay for it. This is not a cheap service to run. Watermarking tends to be a bit cheaper to run. It has a bit higher cost of infrastructure, I think, cost on the front end, but is probably cheaper to run long term. Fingerprinting has some inherent technology challenges that makes it expensive. So there does need to be a business model behind it. I think.
Well, then let's let our friends with the British accents at this end of the table tell us both what the device situation looks like from your perspective, and also what if there is a business model out here somewhere. Andy, you want to try that first? Either one.
Thank you. So your first question is what's the device?
Well, what's the multi-platform device?
I think it's got to be, it's mobile. It's mobile. The question then, I think, is, okay, what does mobile look like for me? And maybe that's a function of my age and my eyesight. It's a tablet. For my kids, it is more likely to be a smartphone. So for me, I read a report recently that said the smartphone is about killing time, and the tablet is about saving time. So it kind of says something about the...
I've heard it the other way around.
Okay, well, but maybe that tells you more about the industry than it does about anything else, because it's kind of, nobody, and I'm not going to claim to know the answer, nobody kind of quite knows the answer. I think to your second point, kind of what are the things that kind of drive the thing forward, what the business models? I mean, my view, and it's not so much the business model, but it's more about but it comes from the user. I think everything has to work in harmony, and I think you have to have the device that is kind of really functional, elegant, whatever it is. You have to have great content. You have to have great technology, some of the stuff that I think we all think we have. So you have a kind of seamless and harmonized experience. The kind of classic, the strength of the chain is defined by the weakest link. So, and I say that because I think, consumers, users have now achieved a threshold of acceptance of new technologies and new kind of ways of consuming content and entertaining themselves that is very high, and I think will frankly only go higher. So therefore it's very incumbent upon us, I think, on this panel and our peers, to step up to the plate and give them what they want.
Graham, I'll let you have a last word on this before we turn it over to some audience questions.
I think actually, one of the more important points that everybody on the panel keeps raising is monetization. Everything is always going to come back to, well, who's going to pay for it? As technologists, we develop applications, we develop services, and yet someone still has to pay for them. The media business is, to me, a very traditional business. It doesn't want to move forward. It doesn't want to endanger its current income, even though it can see that income is going to gradually disappear over time. But for now, they're getting paid their wages, they're keeping people employed, and I think, where the problem comes. As times change, everybody needs to move forward. Monetization, that's what we need.
We're like sharks, always have to move forward to live. Listen, Fred, do we have time for any audience Q&A, or are we out of time? Out of time. In that case, thank the panel. Thank you for your good attention. We'll be around for a few minutes if you have any more questions. Thank you.